さて、皆様お待ちかねのですね、基調講演の方に入っていきたいと思います。基調講演は、エピックゲームスでフォートナイトなどの UX ディレクターをされていらっしゃいました、セリアさんです。本日はですね、サンフランシスコとつなぎながら、QA セッション、そしてですね、盛り上げていきたいと思っております。で、皆さん、冒頭のですね、ご挨拶の中でも、WMC のですね、萩原さんが、お子さんももうすでにフォートナイトにハマってるっていう話もありましたけども、結構このですね、セッションに参加されている方でもご存知の方多いと思うんですが、ゲームです。ゲーム空間なんですけれども、そこでですね、社交的にみんながつながって一緒に戦ったり踊ったりで、私の経験から言いますと、コロナの中でですね、米津玄師さんとか、日本のライブアーティストももちろん海外の方もそうですけども、そのメタバース、フォートナイトの中でですね、ライブをし、私はアバターで入っていきながらそこで一緒に踊るみたいな体験をしておりまして、新しいライブ体験、ゲーム体験で社交体験というものが行われております。で、その楽しい体験を作っていらっしゃる、もしくは人とつながる喜びをですね、作っていらっしゃるのが、これから基調講演を行います、セリアさんです。で、セッションの後にはですね、QA コーナーがあります。15分間ですね、みんなでですね、セリアさんにこれ聞きたいっていうところを聞きますので、ライブでご登場いただきますので、ぜひ皆さん YouTube のコメント欄でもですね、質問を書いていっていただきたいと思います。それでは、セリアさんですね、お招きしたいと思います。セリアさん、よろしくお願いします。Hello.
こんにちは。
こんにちは。Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Hello from San Francisco.
Yay. ちょっとなら通訳も入れながら行きましょうかね。
サンフランシスコからこんにちは。
ありがとうございます。Yeah, go ahead.
I'm very happy to be with you, and I hope that you will enjoy the talk, and I'll be happy to answer questions afterwards.
本日はお招きいただきまして本当に光栄です。この後のトークをお楽しみいただけたら幸いです。その後の質疑応答に参加するのを楽しみにしております。
もう本当に楽しみにしてます。I'm so thrilled you have you. OK。それではですね、セリアさんの動画の方に入っていきたいと思います。動画の方よろしくお願いします。
Hi everyone, konnichiwa. My name is Celia Hodent. I have a PhD in psychology and I've been working in the video games industry for the past 14 years. I worked at Ubisoft in France. I'm French. Then I worked at Ubisoft Montreal. I worked at LucasArts in San Francisco on Star Wars games. And then I worked at Epic Games where I was director of UX at the studio level. And I worked on several projects including Fortnite. I left Epic in late 2017 and I've been doing some consulting work in freelance ever since then around questions on UX and game UX, cognitive biases and new technologies and inclusion, etc. So I'm very happy to talk to you today about the UX challenges of future immersive experiences, including the metaverse. With games like Fortnite or Roblox or new spaces like Meta Horizon, we see that there are some new environments where players or users can navigate in 3D and share experiences and create and communicate, etc. So this is the first steps to what we call the metaverse. So what is the metaverse? It's a persistent virtual world, an immersive shared space where humans can have a sense of presence and where they can actively participate. So they are in the same environment, mostly in 3D. This is the main difference between the metaverse and internet today, where we navigate in 2D. So here we would navigate in 3D and we share the space and we can create in that world, and we could hop from one little world to another little world, say from Roblox to Fortnite, seamlessly like we do when we navigate from one web page to another. The big difference is that it would be in a 3D environment and that we would have a greater sense of presence and in some cases embodiment. So we would have an avatar in that space. So before we talk more about the metaverse, I want to tell you about what UX is about. When you design an environment, whether it is a park, a website, or the next metaverse, what you design is what you had in mind. And in the end, this is what you're trying to produce But what we call the user experience is what people are going to do with this design. And people have their own goals, and they probably want to cut through the grass here because they need to cross the street. And they're not going to take the lovely path that you designed because they actually are in a hurry and they want to cut through the grass. That is what user experience is about. It's what people do with what you designed, and what is the experience they're going to have as they interact with this design. And if we do not think about user experience from the beginning, we often end up being surprised about how people use the environment, and we try to patch things here and there, telling them, hey, no, this is not how you're supposed to use this environment. You're supposed to use the provided path, but people do not care. They should be able to use a tool, an environment, or a system the way they see fit. So it's for us creators to take that into account. The problem is that an experience is not something tangible. An experience is what happens in people's mind as they interact with something. So we cannot really design an experience. We're going to design an environment, and we hope that people are going to have a specific experience as they interact with this environment. So the idea here is when we design an environment, we need to consider the human factors when creating objects, systems, services, or games, so that the people who are going to use these products are going to be able to have the experience that we hope for them. So a definition of user experience is really trying to anticipate and measure how your target users are interacting with a game or a system or a product, including how engaging this experience is. So us as developers, and I include everyone and developer, anyone participating into the creation of something, you have a specific mental model, specific representation of what you want this product, this system to be, and then you have to implement it in a system that has specific constraints. And then the users, they come over with their expectations, depending on how they've heard about your product. And then they're going to try to figure out how the system works, and they're going to make up their own mental model of what the system is about only through their interaction with the system image. So the system image is everything that is interfacing between the system, let's say a game engine, and them. And so yes, it's going to be the user interface, the UI, but not only, is going to be everything that they perceive and interact with. So it's going to be the animation, it's going to be the sound effects, it's going to be the level design, it's going to be the environment design, etc., etc. Don Norman is the one who coined the term UX, and it's important to keep in mind that when he talks about user experience, is not only focusing on what experience users have with the product itself, he's also focusing on the whole journey a user is going to have with the product's ecosystem. So for example, how they hear about it, the marketing of the product, how they download the product, or how they install the product, and later on, do they need to contact customer support or community managers? All of that is part of the experience. So it's really important to consider the whole journey. And because an experience is what is happening in people's minds, we need to understand a little bit how the mind works, how the brain works, so that we can make sure we offer the best experience possible. The brain is actually very limited. This is a very simplified diagram of what's going on in the brain when we process information and when we learn something. These are what we call mental processes, and this is what cognitive science is studying. Information processing always starts with a stimulus from the environment that we gather through our senses, and perception is making sense of what we're gathering through our senses. So that's understanding the input. And then as we process information, if we learn something new, what's going to happen is going to change something in our memory. It's physically changing something in the memory. The synapses that are the connections between neurons are changing as we interact with the environment and learn new things. So memory is really always changing. The brain is constantly changing. We have what we call brain plasticity. It's thanks to that we can learn new things and adjust to our ever-changing environment. From perception to a change in memory, there are a lot of things happening to process information. We have a lot of factors happening. We have biological factors, DNA has an impact. We have physiological factors. If we're tired or if we had too much to eat, we might not be able to process information as well. But the factor that we're going to talk about here more specifically is attention, and we're also going to talk a little bit about motivation. And these factors are influencing the quality of information processing, the quality of learning. So keep in mind that this is extremely simplified. The brain does not have independent compartments like this, and it's not a strictly serial process. A lot of things are happening at the same time, and those compartments are not strictly specialized into certain elements. So just keep in mind that it's extremely simplified and that we're just going to take them one after the other, but in reality, it does not work that way. So let's start with perception. If you look at this image here, what do you perceive? You might be perceiving Lego blocks, or you might be perceiving DNA, or it could be socks or flags, or maybe you recognize Street Fighter characters as minimalized by artist Ashley Browning. The reason why I'm showing you this is because perception is subjective. Depending on your prior knowledge about Street Fighter, if you played that game or if you know about that game, you might have recognized the patterns of the characters. But if you don't know much about that game, you're very likely to have perceived something differently. And that's the main problem with perception. It's subjective. Also, if you're colorblind, which is the case of about 8% of the male population, you might feel excluded from this example, and I apologize for that. But it's also a great way for me to remind to everyone that we should not use colors only to express information. We want to make sure that our designs are inclusive, but the problem is that any design has the potential to exclude people. So we have to make sure that we identify where we can exclude people and we break down those barriers. So perception is subjective, and it's a big problem because it means that it's not because we find something obvious when we design something that others and our users are going to find it obvious, or even they're going to perceive it in the same way. So prior knowledge, expectations, context, all of that can change perception, as well as culture. Of course, depending on our culture, we are not perceiving the same things. So that's the reason why we also have to think about culturalization if we create a product for global use. So perception is subjective, and memory is also very fallible. This is the forgetting curve that was put together by Ebbinghaus in the 19th century. It's showing the exponential nature of forgetting. What that means is that when you learn about something, you're very likely to forget a bunch of elements or a bunch of information after a few minutes, and after a day, you can lose up to 70% of the content from one day to the next. So this curve was obtained with information that is not meaningful. So if the information is meaningful and you understand why you need to learn certain things, the curve is not as bad. But still, we need to expect that users from one day to the next are going to forget about elements in their interface or what they need to do with the product. So memory is fallible, and we need to account for this. That's the reason why we make sure that there's always information in the heads-up display, the HUD, and the interface. And we really should not rely on people's memory. So that's one other takeaway. Last thing I wanted to talk about is attention. Our attention resources are actually very scarce. We cannot really carefully scan all of our environment. That's the reason why finding Waldo can be difficult. He's actually here, because this is not really how our attention works. Rather, attention works like a filter. We are focusing on one or two elements, and we are filtering out the rest. So what that means for our users is, because attention resources are scarce, we cannot expect that they're going to be able to pay attention to every little detail, that they're going to read everything. They're going to try to do things fast, and they're going to miss information, and they might get misled if we don't really help them, if we don't guide them to really find the information that they need. So perception is subjective, attention resources are scarce, and memory is fallible. These are the main limitations of the brain, and it's very, very important to take that into account when we design something for human consumption, because humans have these limitations. And so if we want to offer them the best experience possible, we absolutely need to account for these limitations. In games, to do that, we use some guidelines and some frameworks to make sure that we're not forgetting about something and that we can offer the experience that I want to offer. The way I break down game user experience is in two main pillars: usability and engageability. Usability is really about the ability of a system to be used. Can people understand what they need to do? Can they understand the control, their objective, et cetera, et cetera? So we have a list of what we call heuristics. So these are guidelines to help us make sure that an interface is going to be usable. This is inspired by Jacob Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics, but here they were adapted a little bit for the game industry. And also the idea was to use a vocabulary that makes more sense for video game developers. And here the idea is not necessarily to go through everything, not to be exhaustive, but to establish a common language so that we can more easily communicate with one another, so that we can find the issues that players are going to have and also try to figure out why and fix it. On this list, I'm going to spend just a little time on form follows function. We can also call that affordance in design. The idea of form follows function is to make sure that through the shape, through the form of an element, the users can be able to understand its functionality. So here's an example from a game, Super Mario Brothers. In this game, they make it very clear how the enemies can be dangerous to you. And just by looking at them, you can try to understand a little bit how they work. For example, on the top left, the boulder is attached to the ground, so it's not going to run after you. So as long as you stay away, it cannot hurt you. The bullet, on the other hand, can go very fast in one direction. So if you are in front of it, you're going to get hurt and you need to get out. The tortoise is a good one as well. Like across the world, we understand tortoises and we know that they're slow. So we can expect that this enemy is not going to go very fast. We can also expect that because it has a shell on its back, it might not get hurt if we jump on it. The flower has very sharp teeth as it's opening its mouth. So maybe we should not jump on it as the mouth is open. The skeleton is about to throw a bone at us, so this one is probably dangerous from a distance. And Bowser has spikes on its back, so it's probably not a good idea to jump on it. So this is a great illustration of form follows function. It's just helping users to understand how things work by ensuring that their perception, so their form, it could be visual, it can be haptic, it can be their audio, conveys properly the functionality of this feature. So through that, it's really helping people understand how an environment, a design works. While usability is important, it's not the only thing important, especially for games. A game is not a tool. We're not interacting with a game in order to accomplish a goal. We interact with a game to have fun. And so if a game is just usable, it's nice, but a usable game can also be boring. So we really want to make sure that a game is going to be fun. And what that means is a bit complicated, but I prefer to talk about engageability. So we're trying to make sure that the game can engage people. We can assume that if they're engaged, it means that they're having fun. And so this is what we also want to focus for anything entertaining, such as video games. To define engageability is a bit more tricky. We do not have a lot of research like we do for usability. For engageability, this is how I'm breaking it down. So this is my way of describing engageability. I break it down into motivation, emotion, and game flow. So motivation is really important. It's the key element for engagement, because you're not going to be engaged with something if you're not motivated to do that thing. You would not be listening to me right now if you were not motivated to listen to me. So there is no behavior without motivation. That's the reason why there cannot be engagement without motivation. So that's really going to be the core element that we're going to talk about. And also emotion and what we call game flow I'm not really going to have the time to describe them, but emotion, if an environment elicits certain emotions, that can be even more motivating for us to keep engaging with this environment. The sense of presence is going to be very important for the metaverse, especially when there is an embodiment. So if you have an avatar in the environment, you need to make sure that people feel that they are part of the environment and don't feel that they're still outside the environment and don't have this awkward feeling that they're not really there. Game flow is quite specific to video games, but it's coming from the theory of flow from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And the idea was try to figure out what makes people happy. And Csikszentmihalyi found out that the people who experience the state of flow more often seem to be happier. And you are in a state of flow when you are completely concentrated on what you're doing. So he started to study artists. So if you could be playing music or painting or doing creative activity, you are in the flow when you just lose track of time and you're completely absorbed with what you're doing, and you don't feel any more internal pressure. You might be hungry, but you're not really feeling it. But also you're not having a lot of external pressure as well. And maybe someone is talking to you and you can really zone out and not really listen to that person. So that's the state of flow. It can also happen as you work hard on something, you're really concentrated on your work. It can also happen as you play video games or as you experience something. If you're really into the task and you're fully concentrated into this world. So just let's talk about motivation. Human motivation is a bit complicated. We have a lot of theories on human motivation, but there's no one theory currently that can explain all of human behavior. There are two main types of motivation that I will talk about today. We have extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is when you do an activity in order to gain something external to the task. For example, when you do something in order to get a reward. So in games, we have a lot of extrinsic motivation going. It's anytime the player has to accomplish a specific mission, and they do it mostly because they want or they need the reward associated with this mission. Let's say that they want some new gear, something that looks cool. They might get it if they do a specific mission, or it could be they want to craft something cool, and to craft the thing that they're interested in, let's say they need copper, and they will be able to earn copper if they do a specific activity. So we see a lot of extrinsic motivation in games, and anytime you have clear goals and clear rewards associated with these goals, this is serving extrinsic motivation. But we also have intrinsic motivation. These are the things that we do just for the pleasure of doing them. And we have a very strong theory to explain this. It's called self-determination theory, or SDT for short. It explains that we are more intrinsically motivated to accomplish certain activities when these activities satisfy our needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Competence is, broadly speaking, having a sense of progression. Let's say that you are starting a new activity, whether it is a new sport or a new job or learning how to play a new instrument. If as you practice, you see that you're getting better every day, you really feel a sense of progression, and that gives you a sense of competence. Competence does not necessarily mean always succeeding, but if you fail, you understand why you failed and you can get better next time. It's really having that sense of progression, being able to get better next time and to progress as you put some efforts into something. So in games, it's really, really important. Same thing at work. If you feel that you're progressing, if you're getting a promotion, you really feel that sense of competence. Autonomy is, broadly speaking, self-expression, being able to express yourself, to be creative. So you can choose how you're going to get dressed. You can choose your hairdo. So in a video game, you can change your avatar, but it's also about having meaningful choices. So in a game like Minecraft, for example, first of all, you can be creative. So it's like really great for self-expression, but also you can do pretty much anything you want. You have a lot of autonomy in this game. Or it can be a game where there are different ways to accomplish a goal so that you can really meaningfully choose how you want to solve that problem. At work, we can also feel that sense of autonomy. For example, if our boss is telling us that we have a specific objective for the year, but then they leave us carte blanche so that we can decide how we want to get to this objective. If we are macromanaged by our boss, we can typically feel less autonomous because we do not really have a choice and we just have to follow the instructions. And last but not least, relatedness. Humans are very social species. We would not have survived without the others. And so relatedness is really important. Cooperation or competition in games are very core. So you have a lot of emphasis on competition, but actually cooperation is even more powerful than competition. Like even in sports or esports, oftentimes you see a team competing against another team. They compete against each other, but they cooperate within their team. And today in games, relatedness can also be expressed through just hanging out. So you see, like, for example, in games like Fortnite or Roblox, the players are sometimes just like watching a movie together or dancing or just creating, and they're just hanging out. So that's really, really important to enable social tools so that users can feel that sense of relatedness. So for any new platform that we create, we really need to make sure that we can satisfy human needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So this is how we do in game user experience. We try to make sure that the game is going to be usable and engaging. And there are no recipes to make a successful game. Every game is different and it's tailored to different people who want different things. But what this is a list of ingredients. And then depending on what we're trying to accomplish, we're going to use those ingredients differently. So now what does that mean for the metaverse? Well, we can see in the metaverse, like, for example, in Fortnite, when there was a concert like seen by millions of people, what's interesting is to not only watch the concert, but be there. So it's really different than seeing a concert on your TV or on internet, because yes, you can see it and you can react with other people. But here the idea is you can be there. You have an avatar, you have that embodiment, and you can be in the environment and you can see others and you can more actively participate. And in the metaverse, what's going to be really interesting in terms of relatedness is to make sure that people have that shared experience. So for example, in Epic Games, they had an event where everybody was participating to launching a rocket, and everybody was there to see the rocket launch. It's a shared experience, and that's really important for relatedness. And this is what is worth sharing. Not only what's worth sharing is that you can create, and your experience is going to be different than your friends, but also because you are with others, and because this makes it even more interesting, this is what makes it so interesting to share with others. And so when we think about the metaverse, not only you have to make sure that this space is going to be meaningful, that it's going to be a shared 3D virtual ecosystem where people can be there, can create, can navigate, can see others. And so that's going to be very important to cater to competence, autonomy, and relatedness, and more specifically, relatedness. How can I feel competent in this environment? Do I know where to go, what to do, how to create? Are the tools available for me easy enough so that I can create what I want, or that I can customize this experience? And where are my friends, and how can I communicate with them or do business with others? So this is really what's going to be important in the metaverse, or any ecosystem for that matters. And that's why UX is so important, because we can get there and we can offer great experiences if we have a very strong methodology and a state of mind, so that at every step of the design process and production and publishing, we can make sure that we always place the human at the center of what we do, so that we can ensure that what they perceive is what they're supposed to be perceiving, and make sure that they are not misled somehow, and that everything can be usable to them, but also that we make sure that we satisfy their needs, that we help them accomplish their goals. In human factor psychology and user-centered design and UX, what we care about are the users, the humans, who are going to interact with the product. And so what we want is to improve people's lives with technology, offering users the best experience possible. Of course, it has to be a win-win situation. We're building a product, so the product has to be profitable. Otherwise, this is not going to work, definitely. But it's never going to be exploiting users at their expense to benefit the company. This is not a UX mindset. A UX mindset really is about placing the humans at the forefront, at the center of what we do. So what that means is the UX approach is incompatible with the use of dark patterns or shady practices. And so that's the reason why we need to understand ethics and to consider ethics when we build products and services with a UX mindset. So what is a dark pattern? It's a design that's intentionally deceiving for the benefit of the company at the expense of users. At its core, it's really anti-UX because, like I said, UX is not about favoring the company at the expense of the users. It's the opposite, or it's a win-win situation, but it's never profiting off users. So here's an example of a dark pattern. So here let's say you're on Amazon and you're buying a few things. So you put some items in your cart and then you're ready to check out. And as you say, I want to check out, this is the screen that you would see. And on the screen, there's a lot of text. And typically because attentional resources are scarce, what we tend to do is to click on the big orange button. These buttons are here because attentional resources are scarce. And so we have call to actions to help users accomplish their goals. Except that here, it's not there to help users accomplish their goals, which is to check out. It's here to encourage them to click on the big button so that not only they would check out, but they will also subscribe to Amazon Prime. If you want to check out without subscribing to Amazon Prime, you have to carefully take a look at the environment and find this small hyperlink so that you can click without subscribing. And on top of that, they make you feel bad because they make you feel stupid because you're not saving $19. This is a dark pattern because it's exploiting the limitations of the brain here in terms of attention. It's also guilt tripping people. So it's using emotions in order to convince users to subscribe to Amazon Prime. And on this screen, it's not really clear how much is it. And a lot of people might have subscribed without even realizing that they were subscribing. Probably a lot of people have just subscribed and noticed that because they saw on their bank statement that Amazon is taking money, and they might not really have realized until then. Here, the intention is not to help users accomplish their goals. It's more to increase the number of subscriptions. If we have a UX mindset, we really have to make sure we are not falling into dark patterns or not using shady practices, just like using emotion tricks to make people re-engage or engage with a platform or subscribe to something. So these elements can be used in games and in tech. So it's, for example, if you're playing a game and you don't have any more lives, it might be using a character that is sad and is crying, that triggers some emotional response, and it can guilt trip us into keep playing because we don't want to see a sad character. It could be because we entice people to stay on the platform, otherwise the crops are going to die or our characters are going to die. So if it's really part of the gameplay and there is no game, if you do not have this sort of mechanics, it can make sense and we can justify for it. If it's not really part of the gameplay, it's more to engage people with the monetization or to really force them to come back, because if they're not coming back at a very specific time, just like their rocket launch, that was the big problem because people had to be there at a specific time. It was just happening once. If you were not there, you were really missing out. This is going a bit too far because now it's punishing people for not being there or for disengaging. So it's not always easy to find where the line is, especially for games, because games are about putting pressure on the player. And this is how we create challenge so that the players can have fun. But we do need to think about where the line is and when it stops to really serve the gameplay or to serve the experience we want to offer. And it's more to engage people with the monetization or with the platform for no good reason, which would serve more the company than the users. To go beyond that, we need to understand this better and to identify potentially shady practices and reconsider some of the following, and more specifically with minors, because young people are not as good as adults to control their impulses, and even adults are not great at this. For example, if we love a TV show, we might binge watch that show, even though we're supposed to be sleeping because we have to go to work tomorrow. So even adults are not necessarily good at this, but teenagers and children even less so. I'm not going to describe everything, but some of these elements are feeding what we call the attention economy. So that's the idea that the technology is really grabbing our attention and making us stay in a certain platform. So again, if we stay in a platform because we're having fun or because the platform is usable and efficient for us and we can accomplish our goals, or we can see our friends and be creative, it's not necessarily an issue. It's an issue when there are some shady practices and dark patterns that force somehow people to come back, not really because they want to experience something at that moment, but because if they don't, they might lose something. So that's the sort of things we need to really focus on. And it's true today. It's true not just in tech. It's true across the board. But in the metaverse, these are also some priorities that we have to think about. And ethics is also about making sure everyone is included. And that's the reason why diversity is so important. Also, when we create something, I'm going to show you a video that is expressing what I mean by this.
Nice. Okay, Noel, you try now. Onto your hand. Two black. Yeah. Come again. Come again, Sashi. No, you too back over me.
What I do to get.
What you have to do
That's how racialist thing is.
Yeah.
That's always a piece of white. Let's say a napkin and show it.
Again, put your pin again.
Napkin again.
Right, put your hand out.
What's it called on my hand?
Man, black man getting fight.
So here what happens is that because a tool has been developed with a team that is probably very homogeneous, probably all white people, they might have tested this soap dispenser among themselves and they saw that it was working well, but they did not even think to test it with darker skin tones. This is not necessarily a bad intention. We are all humans. We all have limitations. But if you do not have a strong UX mindset and you do not think about inclusion at the core of what you're doing, you're not going to have processes and methodologies that can actually help you avoid these problems. So when we are developing something, whether it is a soap dispenser, a health device, or the metaverse, we absolutely want to make sure that this is going to be inclusive. Like I said before, any design has a potential to exclude some people. It's our job on the creative side to identify these barriers and to take them down so that the experience can be inclusive to everyone. And we have a lot of these challenges, and they're overall fairly similar across all the different platforms, but there are also specific design and inclusion challenges depending on the platform. For example, in AR, the big challenge is to make sure that the attentional resources of the people are not draining, because it's actually pretty hard to process what's going on in the environment and to process what is displayed on our glasses. And it can be really difficult to focus our attention on the right elements. And we can also get hurt with the real life environment if the device is not taking that into account. In VR, for example, one of the challenges is to make sure that people have a sense of presence in the world that they are embedded. So we have embodiment in VR, like you are really an avatar in a world. We want to make sure that, first of all, it's not making you sick, and that you can understand where to go and you're not disoriented, and it's not too draining to interact with the world. If you have to do a lot of gestures, it's going to be difficult. And also it's not going to be accessible. You also want to make sure that the world acknowledges that you are here. So for example, if you meet a friend in the metaverse in a VR experience and you see your friend, but because of technical issues, they're not making eye contact with you, it seems that they're looking a little bit off from where you are, it's really going to feel like you're not there and it's going to feel awkward. So these are some of the challenges that we're going to have Another challenge is how people are going to interact in the 3D environment in VR. For example, when I was working on Bullet Train on Epic Games, it's a video game and you have to find weapons and to shoot at robots. In playtest sessions, we're seeing a lot of the participants having really a hard time understanding when they could really grab something. So they were seeing something in the environment, they were trying to get closer to it, and you would see them trying to reach out their arm to grab it, but they were not really getting where it was in the 3D space. So one of the things that we did is, for example, to highlight in yellow as soon as their arm is close enough to the object to be able to grab it, so that they could have a better sense of when they could grab the object. That's just a few examples among the many challenges that we're going to have to help people navigate in a 3D space, whether it is in AR, in VR, or through different devices. Another big challenge is to make sure that no matter which device you're using to get into the metaverse, the experience is going to be consistent. Let's say you are on the bus and you do not have your VR headset with you, but you want to join the metaverse and see your friends with your phone, and how is it going to look like? Maybe your friends are going to be in VR, maybe one of your friends is going to be in VR, another one's going to be in AR, and you're going to be on your phone. And in the shared 3D space, no matter which device you're using to get into the metaverse, we need consistency. So that's going to be another big challenge. And last but not least, we also need to make sure that people are safe. We know that harassment and disruptive behavior is something very problematic today already in video games and on social media. It's just going to make it worse when you have embodiment in a virtual space, because when you are in VR and you feel that you are embodied into a space, whatever happens to you feels very real. So that's going to be also another big challenge to solve for the metaverse, especially in VR. That's it. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope that gave you some food for thought. I have a few books out there if you want to learn more, either about how to make games with a UX approach, or if you want to just learn a little bit more about the psychology of video games, or just to understand a bit better what UX is about. The two books on the right are very small, and it's just an introduction to these worlds. You can also reach out to me on Twitter, and you'll find a lot of resources on my website, celiahodent.com. Thank you so much again for your attention. ありがとう。
素晴らしいセッションでした。もっともっと聞きたくなるなというセッションだったんですけども、さてここからまたセリアさんに帰ってきていただきながらですね、皆さんからいただきました質問を聞いていきたいと思います。セリアさん、よろしくお願いいたします。
That was such an amazing session. Thank you very much, Celia. Welcome back, Celia. I'd like to start the Q&A session now.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. それではですね、私が日本語で読み上げるのを通訳の方にですね、通訳していただきながら答えていただきたいと思います。全部で5つあります。まず1つ目の質問ですが、フロー状態という話がありました。で、このフロー状態と幸福感の相関性に関するお話がありましたが、特に子どもの教育においてゲームに没頭することでフロー状態って先ほど言ったやつですね。ゲームに没頭すること、このフロー状態になることが良くないといったイメージがまだまだ、特に日本ではですね強くあると思います。そこでこの教育におけるゲームのあり方というようなテーマで、セリアさんがどのようにお考えなのか教えていただけますでしょうか。
So regarding the first question, you mentioned the correlation between the state of flow and sense of happiness. When it comes to child education, especially in Japan, getting immersed with games which is in the state of flow, isn't great, and that perception is widespread. So I'd like to get to know your opinion regarding what games in education should be.
Sure. Yeah, I know a lot of parents are worried, especially when their kids are really into games. But it's not a problem if the game is appropriate to their age. Children have a tendency to be really focused on something, whether they're playing games or reading a book or playing with friends. What can be a problem if they're only playing one game all day long? This is not good for the brain, definitely. But games are very important for child development. So any game, as long as it's appropriate for the age, can be good, as long as children vary the games they're playing. So they can play a little bit of video games, and they can play a little bit with Legos or with other games, or playing with their friends, or reading a book and being outside and playing with a ball. That's none of these things are a problem. The problem is if they're only focusing on one thing all day long. That's not good.
そうですね。お子さんがゲームに集中していると心配される親御さんというのは多いと思います。お子さんが例えばゲームに集中していたりですとか、友人とお友達と遊んでいたりですとか、本を読んだりしていたりですとか、一つのことに集中しているというのは問題ありません。で、特にゲームに関しましては、その遊んでいるゲームが年齢に適切、そのお子さんの年齢に適切であれば問題はありません。ゲームで遊ぶことが問題になってしまっているのは、一つのゲームに一日中集中して一日中遊んでしまうことなのです。ですので実際にゲームで遊ぶというのは成長にとっても良いものなので、例えばビデオゲームとレゴで遊ぶ、それから他のゲームで遊ぶというバラエティを作ってあげるとか、ゲームで遊んだ後にお友達と遊んだり、外でボールで遊んだりとバラエティを加えることがあれば特に問題はないと考えます。
ありがとうございます。それではですね、次の質問に参りたいと思います。またこのゲームフローの話です。で、ゲームフロー、特に蓄線とミハイのフローの話をされておりましたけども、このフロー状態になるためにはある程度のストレスが、蓄線とミハイの話の中でも必要になると思うんですけども、ただそのストレスというものも一人一人の主観で変わってきます。それをセリアさんはフォートナイトのような、多くの方々が集まるゲームの時に、その個人個人がストレスを感じるというところをどのような形でデザインさせて、作り上げたのかというところを伺いたいと思います。
So the second question is also to do with the flow. You mentioned Mihai, Csikszentmihalyi Mihai, the game flow. So to be in the state of flow, you need some degree of stress, and so especially games like Fortnite, you need to be in the flow, and so how did you create different levels of stress that are perceived by individuals, because the level of stress is quite subjective again. So
yeah, so it's not really stress, is more challenge than stress. So for example, if you play some music, if you play the guitar, it can be difficult for you to play a certain tune, but it's not stressful necessarily, but you want to get better at it, so you do it again and again. That's what we mean by challenge. It's not necessarily stress. In games, it's very difficult because, of course, the challenge is not in the game. It depends on individuals. That's the reason why we try to make games where the players can sort of decide what sort of level of challenge they can have. And it's what's going to be important for them is to feel that they're trying to accomplish something, and even if they fail or don't win immediately, they can start again and try a different method to try to win. So this is how we can create that sense of flow. But what's going to be really important is to make sure that players understand why they fail and what's going on. When we have big UX issues, when people fail and they don't understand what's going on, this is when it can break the flow or people cannot get into the flow. So there's a lot of other things to consider, but it's a bit complicated to explain in just 1 minute. But this is really something that is hard and we need to test. And it's depending on people for sure. Like players who play a lot of video games usually want and need more challenges than players who don't play a lot of games. So we do try to make sure everyone can have fun.
そうですね、非常に大きなテーマでして1分間でお答えするのは非常に難しいんですけれども、ここで言うストレスというのはどちらかというと課題というかチャレンジのようなものです。例えばギターを学んでいる時、ギターを弾きたいと思って何か曲を学び始めた時、難しい曲もあると思います。でもそこでストレスを抱えるというよりも上手くなりたいからどんどん頑張って、練習しようと思うわけです。でそれはチャレンジを抱えているということになります。ゲームの場合は少し難しいんですけれども、このチャレンジというのはやはり一人一人で異なります。で、なぜゲームをするかというと、やっぱりチャレンジして何かを達成したいからだと思います。ですので、その重要なこととしてはやっぱり達成感を、上げてあげること、そして勝ったとしても例えばすぐにまたトライしてまた違う方法で勝てるようにしてあげることで、そのようにして遊び続けることでフローの状態に入っていくことができます。やはり重要なのはごめんなさい、悪い UX というのは失敗したとき、なぜ自分が失敗したのか理由がわからないということです。で逆にいい UX というのは、失敗したときに何が起こっているのか、なぜ失敗してしまったのかという理由が分かってその次に進めることです。ですのでそのような UX を開発するためにはやはり何度もテストを行って、楽しいゲームを作ってあげるということが、重要です。
ありがとうございます。はい、それではですね、3つ目の質問に入りたいと思います。3つ目の質問ですが、プロダクトを作っている工程で、プロセスの中でチームに UX を理解しているメンバーがいても開発都合やスケジュールを優先していく中で UX が重要視されず、結果的に使いづらいコンテンツになってしまうことがたびたびあります。そのような問題に対して、どのようなアプローチを取っていけばいいかアドバイスいただければ幸いです。
The third question is about even if there is a member who understands the UX in the team in order to create a product, because schedule or some development issues are prioritized, UX is not prioritized, and sometimes we end up developing contents that are really hard to use, and that often happens. So how can we approach to such a situation?
It's a hard question. Yes, it happens a lot, and oftentimes it's because the companies do not have a good, what we call UX maturity, and some people within the team know that it's important, but then the people sometimes at the top of the hierarchy don't necessarily understand it and ask for features to be added when what we already have, the foundations, don't work well. It's really hard to change the mentality. It takes a lot of time. What can help is to do a lot of user testing, so UX research, so that you can show what works and what doesn't work. And if you can link to what we call the KPIs, it's key performance indicators. For example, if someone doesn't understand what's going on and therefore they abandon a website and they don't buy anything, then this is gonna impact badly the sales. And so when we can show all this cycle and how bad UX is impacting the product and also the users, this is when we can move in maturity. But it takes years to do this. It's long.
そうですね、すごくいい質問だと思いますし、これは本当によくあることだと思います。よくあるのは、UX の成熟度というものを持っていない企業が多いということだと思います。チームの中の人は UX の重要性を理解しているにもかかわらず、例えばトップの人が理解していない場合は、例えば後でこの ゲームの土台となる、ゲームや作っているものの土台となるものとは相入れない機能を後で付け加えろという指示が出てきたりしてしまいます。でそうするとそのような状況がすでに作られていますので、そのメンタリティを変えるのには非常に時間がかかります。でこういう場合はやはりテスト UX のリサーチをすることが非常に重要になります。でリサーチを通して何がうまくいって何がうまくいってないのかを、まず確認してからそれを KPI とすり合わせます。で例えば何かウェブサイトで商品を売っている場合は、そのウェブサイトからユーザーが離脱してしまって商品を買ってくれないと売り上げが落ちるわけです。でその点をやはり理解していかなければなりません。でやはりUX というのは商品とユーザーに関わるところです。ですのでここは本当に作業する必要があるんですけれども、やはりメンタリティ意識を変えるのには時間がかかります。
ありがとうございます。UX の成熟度っていうキーワードがなかなかすごいなと思いながら伺っておりました。で、あと2つ質問あるんですけど、次の質問もしかしたら今と同じ感じかもしれないので補足することがあればという形で伺いたいんですけども、セリアさんのセッションの中で、その UX デザインとは、そのカスタマーサポートを含むユーザーすべての体験を考える必要があるという話がありました。でそうなりますと、その組織そのものも変わらなければいけないのかなというふうに思いながら伺ってたんですけども、そのセリアさんはその組織デザインというところも意識して、コンテンツを作られているかというところを伺ってよろしいでしょうか。
So the next question might be to do with what you have just mentioned. But if you like to add anything else, please let us know. But the question is actually, you mentioned that the UX design includes everything from customer support and user experiences. But if you think like that, the whole organization might need to change. Have you got any experience of designing the organization itself?
Yes, absolutely. Just a precision, it's the UX strategy that's going to be really important to everyone. UX design is a bit more specific to a specific role. But yes, this is what UX strategy is about. You cannot have a UX strategy if everybody does not understand how they work impact the end users, and what are the good processes and what are the good people that we need, the appropriate people that we need to hire to have the correct expertise. This is my job, actually. I am a UX strategist. I'm not a designer, and I make sure that we have the right people, UX designers, that we have researchers, that we have a right pipeline, and that, of course, all the way to the decision makers, people understand how that works and leave enough space for research and to ensure that we are on the correct path. And this is what UX strategy is about.
そうですね。ちょっと正確にお伝え申し上げますと、UX の戦略という部分は本当に全員が含まれるものであります。で UX のデザイン設計の方になりますと、こちらはもうちょっと範囲の狭まった特定の役職になります。でやはり UX の戦略に関しては全員が理解していかなければならないところだと思います。それはエンドユーザーへの影響もありますし、正しいプロセスを導入して期待値を管理していくということが含まれます。私は UX のデザイナーではなくて、戦略ストラテジストとして、仕事をしているわけなんですけれども、その戦略に関してはやはり、適材適所、それからリサーチャーですとか、関係者、そして意思決定者などを、踏まえて、リサーチを行い正しい道筋を立てていくということが重要になります。
ありがとうございます。それでは最後の質問に参りたいと思います。セリアさんのセッションの中で、私たちが気をつけなければいけないことということで、知覚は主観的という話がありました。で、当たり前だから大丈夫っていう自分の主観ではダメだという話があったんですけども、それではデザイナー、今回参加者のうち半分ぐらいがデザイナーさんなんですけども、そのデザイナーはどうやったら自分の主観というものを取り除いてデザインをしなければできるのか、そのデザイナーの主観の取り除き方、コツみたいなところあれば教えていただきたいと思います。
So this is going to be the last question to you. It's about what you mentioned. Perception is subjective. So you shouldn't think that this is matter of course, it should be all right. But and half of the participants today are designers. So as a designer, how can we remove our perception, our subjectivity when we design products?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is we cannot. That's the reason why we need to test all the time. We can be more aware of different cultures and different symbols that people are using. But even if we are aware of this, most of the time, if we don't test and we don't test our designs with users, we're just going to forget about it. It's really, really hard to remember such a thing. So we can train ourselves a little bit and know things a bit better, but at the end of the day, there's no way we can remove that subjectivity. That's the reason why we need to do research.
そうですね、究極的なお答えをしますと、この主観を取り除くということはできません。ですので、いつもテストを行うということが重要になります。そのようにして文化ですとか使う記号などに関しての違いに対する意識を高めていきます。で、自分が意識していると思ったとしても、例えばエンドユーザーを使ってテストしないでこのような事柄を忘れてしまうことがよくあります。ですので、もちろんトレーニングをするということもできますけれども、ここでの鍵はテストを続けるということです。
素晴らしい、いろいろとためになる回答ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございます。
Thank you, Celia さん。That's amazing. ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
バイバイ。ありがとうございます。はい、皆さんですね、素晴らしいセッションだったと思います。アーカイブもございますし、あとセリアさんがですね、本の紹介とかツイッターとかもフォローしていいよっていうふうにおっしゃってましたので、ぜひまだまだ学びたいという方はですね、本を買うとか、あとはツイッターフォローして学ぶみたいなことをですね、続けていただければと思います。もちろんアーカイブも見ていただきたいと思います。はい、それではですね、ここから1時間、お昼休みに入りたいと思います。午後の部は、1時からスタートします。また皆様1時にお会いしましょう。